everybody doing? Awesome. We're going to have a great night tonight. As David said, I'm Gwydion Sullivan. I'm the executive director of the Faulkner Foundation, and our mission is to champion the breadth and power of fiction, which is why this night is one of the most important nights of the year for us, because we've got the breadth of power of fiction in our community right here, and we are all gathered together in this holy place to hear from our shamans, like the people who lead us and think for us and dream for us and tell us stories, which is just spectacular. I do want to thank DC Public Library for being the best partners. The more we do with them, the better a relationship it is. I feel very, very, very lucky. And these are the caretakers of our culture, so, we can't live without them. We're so lucky to have such meaningful and thoughtful people looking out for us. So, let me introduce the people you're actually here to see, which is not me. But first we have K.T. Winn, the author of You Know What You Did, which is a psychological thriller. It won the Agatha Award for Best First Mystery and an Anthony Award for Best First Novel, just to name two. And believe me, I really could actually go on for a while here. It's had a lot of success. Instead, I will just say that I really love this book. I could not put it down, and if you haven't read it, you should. Next, we have Nikki Payne, the author of The Princess and the P.I., who is one very impressive human being. By day, she is, ready for this, a civic anthropologist. Raise your hand if you've heard of that. It's the coolest job title ever. Who builds accessible government services for vulnerable populations. We thank her for that. But by night, lucky for us, she is a writer whose work has been called incandescent by the Washington Post. That's a great word. You want that said about you if you're a writer. And finally, we have Dolen Perkins-Valdez, a former Faulkner board member of many, many happy years for us. And the New York Times bestselling author of Happy Land, which was named a most anticipated book of 2025 by Harper's Bazaar, Ms., Real Simple, Women's World, People, Reader's Digest, and basically everywhere all over the planet. And finally, leading tonight's conversation is the sort of amazing, one-of-a-kind Lupita Aquino, who is better known to those of us on Instagram and TikTok as Lupita Reads. If you don't know Lupita yet, let me tell you, you're in for a treat. She is a passionate, relentless, intelligent, sort of heroic literary citizen. She's like Batman or Wonder Woman for books, just like lifting up the entire community. And we're really, really lucky to have her here tonight. So Lupita and everybody else, come on in, take us away, take it away from here.
Hello. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for being here, for taking the time to join us this evening. I want to thank the DC Public Library and also Faulkner for the programming they've done around DC Reads. We're going to get into the individual workshops that these amazing authors got to do in a moment, but I just want to shout out a quick thank you into East City Bookshops, who are also out there selling these amazing books that you absolutely have to read if you haven't read it. And if you have, then you know. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to our authors. I just want to thank you all for writing, for featuring our greater Washington area in your stories. A mobile, just like putting us on the page. I feel like that is so special, so thank you. Yeah, and I just kind of want to start with opening a little bit about, for those who are joining us that haven't read the books yet, I would love you to briefly tell us about your books and your worlds, and just by answering who's the main character and what obstacles are they encountering. And we can start with Dolen. Yeah.
Hello. So my book is Happy Land, and it's set in Western North Carolina. It's a dual timeline historical novel. In the present day, Nikki, who is visiting her grandmother, she lives in D.C., but she's visiting her grandmother, and her grandmother tells her this story that she has never heard before, that her ancestors lived on that land after they migrated up from South Carolina, and they formed an African kingdom and named a king and a queen. And she can't believe it. And in the past timeline, we meet the kingdom folk and the kingdom of the happy land and the king and the queen, who are Nikki's ancestors. So the book is all about discovering these family histories and what it means to us to know our history.
I love any book where Nikki is royalty. I'm a fan. My book is about Fiona Adai, who is a sheltered Reddit detective who may or may not be in a cult, but finds herself in the heist of her life. She's going to avenge the crimes against her brother, and right at the moment when she's about to grab the thing, somebody literally drops dead on the stage. And she is framed for a murder that she didn't commit. I don't know. That's the story. And she has to team up with a very grumpy insomniac PI who has an axe to grind against the church she belongs to. Tricky, tricky. It's a romance, by the way. Should I? Okay.
I want to stop right now and read that while I'm doing this. My book, You Know What You Did, follows the story of Annie Shaw. She's a first-generation Vietnamese-American immigrant, and following the death of her mother, her life begins to spiral out of control. She has OCD, and her OCD, it's disgust-driven OCD, her intrusive thoughts begin to take over her life. The things that she had been told by everybody, these things can't happen, they begin to manifest themselves in real life around her.
Yes. And I mean, it was such a treat to get to read all of your books back to back. It felt like dipping into just like each genre and like fresh, just like a fresh breath of air. It was like spring came early.
My book's never been described as a fresh breath of air.
I know. That sounds strange. And I told you earlier, I told my therapist about it, and my therapist is going to read it now because it's exciting what you did in the book. And I think what I want to talk about is the genre. You know, it's sometimes it's the author's choice, and sometimes you're following the story. So I'm curious about how you all end up writing in the genres that you did, and how you feel. Well, you know, if there's anything that inspired you to write into it. So if you want to start first, Nikki.
Sure. I have always been just fascinated with human relationships. I feel like it is the foundational reason why people just get up in the morning and do anything, right? If you've watched or listened to or watched any media where a character or protagonist has to do some insurmountable task, oftentimes at the very heart of that, the reason why they do it, the reason why any big story starts is relational. It's a relationship they're trying to redeem, they're trying to build, they're trying to remember or bring order to or bring honor to. I just feel like relational drama is like the heart of the thing that I'm always watching for. I used to love Star Trek as a kid, and Star Trek, I was the person just like watching for crumbs for Captain Picard and Beverly Crusher to do anything, you know? I was always that person, watching SVU even, do you know what I mean? For those two people to just finally get together. That was the reason that drove me to media. So romance felt super natural for me. Even if you add romance and make it romantic suspense or a romantic thing, to me, people move for relations and relationships.
So yearning.
Yeah, so much yearning.
So much yearning. There was so much yearning in your book. I'm telling you, spring came early.
and did.
How about you, Dolen?
It's so interesting to hear these answers because I really do feel like our genres are very connected to who we are as people. I always really liked history. I always liked researching history. And long before I knew that I was going to write historical fiction, I knew that I loved history, right? Like, I was the little girl in the family that was nosy, as they used to call us in the South, because I always asked a million questions. Well, what did they do back then? And what did y'all eat? And da-da-da-da. And, you know, so it grew naturally out of my curiosity to, I love research. I love the library. I love talking to archivists, going into the archive. And so all of that really just was a very natural progression. But when I first started out, I was like, I don't want to pigeonhole myself as, you know, historical fiction writer. But I just kept doing it. And then I said to myself, what am I actually fighting here? You know, like, be myself. And that was very freeing for me.
I agree with what you're saying because I like writing psychological thrillers because that's what I love reading. And I've always read some form of crime fiction, some type of mystery, and I've changed between, you know, what subgenre I read, but lately it's psychological thrillers, and I think the reason is because I've been wanting to read scary things, and to me the scariest thing is what's happening in your neighbor's house, what's in his basement there, like what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
Like that, to me, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And here I was thinking, like, what's in your mind? No,
Well, I mean,
you're
that
right,
as
you're
well.
Right, you're right. No. Yeah, that's a little more like deeper in there. But you know, just jumping off of that, was there like a certain spark, idea, something you came across that really inspired the stories that you wrote, the novels that you wrote about?
You know, it's interesting with history, you have a million ideas for books all day long, right? And people will even write me and say, I have the best book for you to write.
Really?
Yes, all the time. But not every interesting historical fact is a book, right? It might be a short story, it might be a journal article or a magazine article, it might be New York Times Magazine, but I have to figure out what can sustain a book and what can keep my interest. And so this, for me, when I learned about this kingdom, I thought, okay, I want to know more. And I just kept digging and I kept digging. So for me, it is what can sustain me through the horror of the years, the grueling years it takes, you know, to write a book. And so what's going to keep my interest? And that, for me, is just the thing I can't let go.
How about you? Yeah.
Okay, so such a variety of things. I want to start at the very beginning of starting this series, particularly with Pride and Protest, which is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice based in D.C. It actually started by trade. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I loved to, and I still do. I'm so interested in desire and what we find desirable and the relationship it has to power. And I was doing this research about dating apps, and they found that Black women and Asian men were the least swiped right on in this in the dating app economy. They were perceived to have kind of less pizzazz. And when I thought about telling a story that had this scaffolding in my head, like Jane Austen does, Jane Austen occupies this space in my head. And when I thought about retelling that story, I thought about what would happen if you retold these stories with this automatic scaffolding, right? And you put a Black body there. You put a desirable woman as the witty Elizabeth Bennet, you know? You made an Asian man the brooding, handsome man who gets the girl, right? And what changes, what stays the same? So I have these questions of who gets to be desirable. I feel like at the heart of every book and every single one of my characters is, to me, answering a question about whose body, whose mind, whose thoughts, whose perceptions get to win, who gets to have a soft landing, who gets to love, and who gets to be loved despite the mess that they are. And I'm always answering or asking that question of my characters.
I think along the lines of what you're talking about, subverting genre, romance, thrillers, they can be very not very diverse. And so particularly the subgenre of domestic suspense, it's a very, very white space. And so when I wrote my book, I wanted to create a character who was very complex. She has a refugee background, she is struggling with OCD, mental illness, but I'm fitting it into this genre of domestic suspense, psychological thriller. And I think that brings a level of complexity and nuance to the story and the genre that you're not going to get other places necessarily.
Yeah, and I think, for all your characters, I know there's canned water up here. We're fancy today. For all of your characters, they're doing this, they're grappling with just these diverse problems. And I will say, I feel like I saw a thread through your books, though, and that was that you all explored grief. And how, in different ways, grieving ancestral ties, the loss of possible land, grieving loved ones, and what that does to us when they're gone, the impact of it. And so I was curious about your decision to explore grief, whether it was intentional, what it was like writing it, and what it's like to be a human who, we're constantly grieving. We're going through stuff now, and we're grieving the past, right? We're like, oh, the way things used to be. That's that grief. So I know it's a big question, so.
I think part of mine, the main character, Annie Shaw, after her mother dies, a lot of the book is experiencing what happens when you don't grieve properly, when you're alive, when you avoid reconciling your emotions from something really traumatic, an experience, escaping a war-torn country, death. When you don't deal with those issues, how they can come out, seep across borders, across, family lines, and how they'll infect your life if you don't deal with them.
For me, for Fiona, she is grieving both her brother, but she's also kind of grieving her natural inclination toward inaction and being safe in the space that she was in, not asking any questions about the community that she grew up in, and the impetus for her finally getting up and saying, this is incorrect, was this attempted kind of erasure of her grief in this community. You should be happy. This person is off into the new world. Why would you cry for this person? Why would you carry this? According to our beliefs, he's in this better place, or he never really existed on this plane anyway. What are your tears for? And that fundamental rejection and claiming of grief is the thing that actually brings her into action.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love hearing when people read my book and frame it in a way that I wasn't thinking of it, because it definitely helps me to figure out what I was doing.
I feel like I'm always very cautious when asking questions.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if the author knows or can see that always.
Sometimes we don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't, because the work is living. It's a living work, especially once you put it into the world. And so to attach intentionality to it, sometimes I find it a little dishonest, because I didn't necessarily. But what I'll tell you, what I was intentional about, maybe not framing it as grief, but I was intentional about exploring Black women's relationships with their mothers, and in a way that was honest and painful. And part of the reason Nikki doesn't know this history is because her mother didn't tell her. And that silence has become a wedge. And I think for my generation, it's so different. We all have daughters, and they are totally different. They speak their mind. I'm sure I can say this categorically, that Gen Z speaks their mind in a way that we didn't.
Yeah.
And so we're just now I feel like my generation is just now at a point where I can kind of be honest about my relationship with my mother I feel fortunate that she's still here at almost 90, that I can talk to her about some of those things. But there was a lot of silence for Gen Xers, because we weren't allowed. It was a type of criticism that we weren't allowed to express because it was considered disrespectful. And so I have been exploring that more in my fiction, just the reckoning of mother-daughter relationships.
I'm glad you said that, because it did also make me think about your book and the mother-daughter relationships. And then you have your character who's trying to fit in this world with her father in a way that she's honoring him. And so, yeah, it's like your characters are grappling the intergenerational experience of what it's like to try to maintain contact, or in some cases not, and what that looks like. And I feel like that's something that is not, as there's a lot of books grappling with it, but it's like to be able to have that from different angles and different genres is so special and magical. Yeah. And I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
I do want to talk about your individual workshops that you all got to do. So if you got to attend one, amazing. If you didn't, I just want to give you guys a little recap. So TK, you got to do a workshop exploring mental health in fiction, covering how to responsibly write from the perspective of a character experiencing mental illness. Dolen, you spent a morning with attendees touring the National Museum of African American Culture and History, and attendees got to learn from Dolen how she uses, the museum or artifacts to discover untold stories. And Nikki, you led a writing workshop focused on the art of retelling. And I got to hear some really fun stories about your workshop. And so I'm wondering if we could start there and just kind of talk about your workshops. I mean, Nikki, I would love for you to share with the audience how your workshop went. I heard that there was a creative, collective retelling of Goldilocks.
Yes, there was. Yes, there was. So one of the things about that workshop, when people are thinking about starting a new story or starting anything, they come with this idea that if they aren't creating anything, something new, something that no one's ever seen before, then it's not worth doing. And what it does is actually stop your creative process. So I played this music, Mutumbe Juicy Fruit, which is just such a jam, such a jam. And it's like something my mother loved. And then what I did over that was play Notorious B.I.G. It was all a dream. And I was like, these are two songs that mean completely different things. And these songs have created a completely different story, right? But you recognize that foundation. And that foundation does work for you, but it also is a lifting space for you to create something totally different and new. I talked a little bit about like Ursula Gwynn and the ecstasy of influence, and how you can read something and you, especially as authors, you can read something and just like close the book and your hands are itching to write afterwards, or you can watch something and it can just light you on fire. And influence is such a gift, and it's not anything to look at and assume that your creativity is not original because something else made you think of something else. That is creativity, actually. So just freeing people of that kind of perfectionism and two trench coats of the way that we think about how creativity comes to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Dolen, do you want to talk to us a little about your...
That's so good, though. I want to do that workshop.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking, can I use that in my next thing?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Really good. I love that whole lesson that you were doing about influence. Gosh, what did I do now? I'm into Nikki's workshop. Oh, is anybody here who was at my, I know I have a couple. Yay! Thank you for coming. We had a great time. We spent the morning at the African American History Museum. It was hard to conceive because we couldn't use earpieces, and the museum, was tricky because it's always crowded. And, we went when they opened, but it's got a lot of, little choke points where it's just very crowded and you can't really. But we figured out a way to do it where we would take time on our own and then meet up and then take time on our own. But we basically looked at the African American Museum, and you could use this with any museum, as having basically 3 or 4 types of exhibits. I can't remember. But one is the multimedia exhibit, one is the artifact, one is text. And so I think there was one other that we did, I can't remember. But we found an artifact that inspired a story, and a couple of people found like a drum that had been used in South Carolina. And then next we found, person, that's right. Wow. A person that would inspire us to write, because some historical fiction is biographical.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we looked at, what else? Oh, institutions. We looked at institutions. I told y'all I'm over here. In my mind is over in Nikki's workshop. We found an institution. And then what was the last one? Oh, it might have been an event. It might have been an event, yes. And so it was really, y'all, we live in the most museum-rich city
We really do.
in the country, and they are free. And there are like 27 of them, something like that. It's like 27 Smithsonians. And the resources that we have here are unparalleled, not to mention the Library of Congress, right? Which is one of the greatest libraries of the world. And so really the whole idea of our session was to think about, and DC Public Library, shout out, okay. Also, wonderful, wonderful resource, right? My kids have made copious use of their library cards over the years. And the librarians are great. So yeah, we have all of these resources here, y'all, that are at our fingertips. New York and Brooklyn should have nothing on us when it comes to
I was just thinking the same
writing,
thing. Yep.
right? All these stories, all of these American stories, and beyond even, are right here. So I'll stop there.
No, and I think you're hooked on Nikki's workshop because influence, creativity. Yeah.
I was hoping you forgot about me.
No, absolutely
I'm like,
not.
I'm going to have Dolen's issue.
I told you, I mentioned that I talked to my therapist about it. And I do think it's really important, the idea of making sure that we're writing characters that are true to our humanity, because mental illness, I think, is one of the things that is most villainized, most stigmatized, and so many people don't get help because of it.
And so the purpose of my workshop was to talk about how you write about characters with mental illness and avoid stereotypes while you're doing that. And to do that, I did a case study where I traced portrayals of OCD in crime fiction from Charles Dickens to Stephen King to Lisa Jewell to present day. And the key was really developing character. It's something we all do, but one, you can subvert stereotypes of the mental illness, and you can also build a rich character around that. Anybody isn't defined by their mental illness. They have a broader life, and I think part of the reason I included the OCD element in my book is because the average time it takes for someone with OCD to get diagnosed is 7 years.
Wow.
If they get a proper diagnosis. And I myself did not know I had OCD until I was in my late 20s, because you see these portrayals in media and TV and books, and it's Detective Monk or something really lighthearted and silly, or the person's just too neat and tidy.
Exactly.
Or it's an advantage and a superpower. And the reality can be a lot darker. Right. The reality for me personally was a lot darker, and I wanted to portray that in my book.
Yeah. And just, going off of that, how did you take care of yourself, writing from a perspective of a character who does navigate those dark moments for their...
I was lucky enough to get a great diagnosis. I went before my daughter was born. I decided to confront the OCD because it was really debilitating, and I responded really well to medication and a treatment plan. So now my OCD is really well managed, and for a lot of people it can be biochemical. It's genetic in my family. There's a strong genetic element. And when it's treated, I still can tune into those intrusive thoughts but I don't have to listen to them. They're not as frequent, and I
They're
don't.
just there. They're
They're
not
there.
you.
I can tune in. I can write about them. It didn't affect me. And I've mentioned this before, but when I was writing it's a psychological thriller with elements of horror. And when I was writing the scenes that are supposed to be scary or have horror-tinged elements, I drew from things that really happened and really troubled me when I read the stories in the news. And as I was writing it in these like raw, visceral details, I thought, is this going to be scary to anyone else? Are they just going to think it's silly?
It was scary for me. I was like,
Well, I've been hearing
read
that.
it anymore.
I did hear that after, but I thought people would just think it's silly if you didn't have OCD. And
Maybe I do have OCD.
oh no! Well, see a specialist.
No, but I just, I love having us here. This has been such a treat. I know that we're going to eventually pivot to audience questions. I do have one more question related to writing fiction and writing fiction in the greater Washington, D.C. area. How did you all find your communities? How do you navigate writing in the areas? Do you have any tips for writers that are trying to find community? Or do you write alone? What is your approach to it?
I'm a loner.
That's okay.
But there are lots of things. I mean, there's a reading series, the Inner Loop, which is a great reading series, and they have a lot of open mics, and anybody can go and read. I know Marita Golden, who is the co-founder of the Hurston Wright Foundation, has a group of women who get together and write, and that has been going on for maybe a decade now, and you could probably just find her on social media and ask to be tapped in. There's lots of just community here if you're looking for it. But for me, because I have a family and a full-time job and everything, like
It's hard.
I have to go into my closet, as
Yeah.
the Bible says.
Yeah.
And try to get the work done. But I think community is really important when you're first starting out. And if you can't find it locally, you can find it online.
There are a couple of things that I do. I would say for community, bookstores are actually crawling with people who are reading and writing. So hooking into like some of the events of East City Books, Loyalty Books, Mahogany Books, they're oftentimes hosting local authors and like authors who are traditionally published, self-published, or writing groups, oftentimes all the time. So like hooking into those bookstores and their events and their community events is a great way to build community. But something that I have done to write in this space is to find like that one, like the one individual who's just wild enough for my story, who can kind of manage my story in its wildness. Do you know, like when you're drafting, and that wild thing that comes out of your head when you're drafting? But I do these kind of one-on-one sprints with a kind of trusted alpha reader, and then we kind of go back and forth to say like, this is crazy, right? And she's like, actually, yes, don't put that on the page. And so like I work kind of solo, but also there's this angel on my shoulder who's just like, girl, don't do that. Do not do that. So I definitely need that. Yeah, I need to be reined in or even pushed, sometimes.
I'm still enjoying Dolen saying she's a loner. I never hear people describe themselves that way willingly. I think when you're writing in a genre like crime fiction, for example, I joined Crime Writers of Color, and that's an organization for crime writers of color, and Mystery Writers of America, and Sisters in Crime, which is not crime fiction for nuns. It's actually women in crime fiction, so don't be confused by that. But those organizations are great, and they have local chapters in the area, and you can meet a lot of people and get a lot of insight into the publishing industry.
Yeah, and I feel like what I'm hearing is just what works for the writing is what's going to work for the writing, right? So community, one-on-one, or alone. You know, like that's, I feel like I'm you. If I'm
In a
writing,
closet.
I'm writing in a closet. So I want to pivot to audience questions. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to, do we have someone coming around with the mic? We do. We're going to borrow two. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Raise your hand.
If we have a shy crowd, I mean, I got plenty of questions. But don't be shy. These authors are so amazing.
I'm just going to start pointing at Paris.
Pick one.
Tell me something. Tell me a story.
Sure. Hi, I'm Tracy, everyone. Hello. And it's a pleasure to finally meet all you all and see you all. Thank you for your work in the community and your workshops. Today is just so awesome to be here and be a part of this and to meet you all individually. Okay. Having said that, I just have a very simple question. Just individually, when did you know that you were going to write a book? Did this start like early at 6 or 8, or did it happen by chance or opportunity, or someone inspired you to do it? I mean, just exactly when did you know? Yeah, that's my question.
I was a magazine editor, so I was writing articles and long-form articles, and I think what inspired me to write the book was envy. I saw all these people writing books and having really creative careers or screenwriting or doing whatever, people I went to college with or had worked with, and I was working a very dull job in marketing and commuting by coastal and not enjoying it. And I decided I could write a book too. So I just wrote a little bit every day, 500 words, and at the end I had a book. And I didn't know anything, but I sent it out to agents, and I got an agent.
I don't know when it came into my head that I was going to write a book, but I do feel like I've always been a storyteller. Like, I was always the person that my brothers and sisters would, like, if some event happened, it would always be like, oh, let Nikki tell it. Or, like, I would get, like, all this attention from adults when I was young, like, relaying some information. So I got a lot of like a benefit from like telling stories and like playing Barbies. I was obsessed with like playing Barbies in these crazy days of our lives, Young and the Restless storylines from my Barbies. I felt like storytelling was just something that I always appreciated. And whether I screamed it to the mountaintops or wrote it down or sang about it, y'all are going to hear this one thing that happened to me, right? So the medium sometimes is secondary almost, you know?
I will say that when I was growing up, I didn't know any writers. All the writers were dead. All the writers were men. So the idea of writing a book was not even something that was in my vocabulary. So I was a reader, but who knew anything about publishing in Memphis, Tennessee, you know, at that time in the 70s? But I got to college, and my freshman, this is why you have to surround yourself with artistic people, y'all. And so my freshman year roommate was gonna be an art major, and she had come from an artsy family, you know, who were professional artists. Like, how do you do that, you know? And she said, you should write a story. You read all the time, you know, you should write a story and try to publish it. And I said, how do I do that? And she said, just, you know, write the magazine. And back then you would just look in the back of the magazine and they'd have an address. It was a New York address. And you'd send your story off and the editor would, not email, there was no email. They would, you know, mail you a rejection letter. But I actually published a story after, her name was Susie Reese. I'm actually gonna see her this weekend and we're having dinner. But I've only seen her like twice in the last 30-something years. But she's the reason, because she's like, yeah, why can't you just write it? And I'm like, what? How do you do that? So, you know, when you have someone, you can speak life into people, y'all. Like, your words have power. And like, especially a young person, speak life into them, you can change their lives. Because Susie Reese changed my life.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you to DC Library, DC Reads, and the authors for making this a very enjoyable winter. It was a cold winter, Sometimes it was a hot winter, but it was definitely very, very enjoyable with your works. To the authors of Happy Land and You Know What You Did, both of you all had stories that moved between the past, the present, from chapter to chapter. And I'm just curious as to how you set that up and how you worked through it. Like, did you write the present first and then go back and inject the past, or were you moving between both time periods at the same time? Did it require a lot of editing? Just how did that work in your process?
Well, for mine, I wrote it pretty much chronologically, but if there were areas, I used the flashbacks to give you insight into Annie's history and her background with her family and growing up isolated in Ohio. So if I felt there was some aspect of her character that needed a brighter light shown on it, then I did another flashback. But for the most part, I wrote it just front to back. And I think I tried to limit the flashbacks because as a thriller, it can really hold up the pacing. So I was economical with the amount of flashbacks I used.
I'm really interested to hear that answer too, because I didn't find it very easy, I'm gonna be honest with you. I had my journal, because I do a lot of longhand writing, and my journal is unlined. I always have unlined pages, and I just drew a line down the middle of the page, and then over in this column was the past story, and over in this column was the present story, and I just wrote like, what are the scenes that need to happen on each end? It wasn't exactly an outline, but it was just some sort of basic charting, you know? And then I kind of looked at like, well, how do I order them? Because you have to sort of hand the baton off between the present and the past in the dual timeline novel. And I kind of had a loose idea of like how I was going to order them. And then I started writing, and it was some days I write to the heat. So if I wake up in the morning and I feel like writing in the past, I write that. This is first draft stuff. And if I wake up and I feel like writing, you know, I write to like where the heat is in the story for me. And then I try to go back to my little chart I made in my journal and see, okay, so am I doing it? I don't know, you know? And then after all of that, my editor came in and said, no, we're gonna do this, and started moving things around. And that, just having that, again, you were talking about having that second pair of eyes, that's one of those times where a second and a third pair even can be really helpful.
I think we have one down here, right here. Yeah. Right. Oh, what? Okay.
We'll
yeah.
come back up here.
Sorry about that.
This is apparently the chatty side of the room.
So first of all, thank you all. Dolen, you know my love for you. But what I want to know, in this world of artificial intelligence, and I do come from the tech industry, so I'm very involved in that every day. But sometimes it isn't used responsibly, and you always have to have the human intelligence side of it to make sure that you aren't being, you know, targeted. I read recently that there was an author, and I think out of the UK, and her book has been pulled because of AI. So how do you all make sure that it's, because research can be part of that artificial intelligence, how do you all make sure that it's buttoned up so much that no one can ever come back and say, this is not you or your words?
Yeah, a couple of things though. I'm also in my other life a technologist as well, and honestly, as a creative, I actually kind of bristle at these kind of purity tests. I don't know if there is a way you can write so tightly, right, that no one can accuse you of anything. You know what I mean? And I find it dangerous to write to a standard of like outpacing a machine learning tool that was trained on real human authors, books stolen and trained on human writing, right? A couple of things that I will say about that also is that, one, these machines are known to not be incredibly reliable. And there is an added tension of feeding material, whether it's original or not, into an AI system, right? That also alternatively trains it, right, to test its validity, right? I have a lot of anxiety about the potential of any creative trying to paint or write or draw better than a computer or against accusations of a computer. Like that, I'll just start with that. Like that gives me pause, like as a creative and as an artist. I just want to sit in my room and do my thing, you know? But I will say that oftentimes I think anyone who is a writer, who is a creative person, writes to write, to tell that story to themselves. And something I said in the other session was, these machines should be workhorses. They should be like donkeys, right? Like they shouldn't be writing creative fiction while I'm washing the dishes. You know what I mean? Like that's not the use of the tools. And so if you are doing more housework while your computer is composing Shakespeare, I think we fundamentally have we have a problem with why you're actually producing the thing in the first place, right? Are you a creative? Is writing the thing that you want to do, or see a story come alive with your own hands? If not, then just read a story. You want to be told a story, that's a different mechanism, right? So there's that sense of like, let the computer do computer stuff, you know what I mean? Leave me the fun stuff, right? But also, like, I really bristle at a purity test for those types of things. I just do.
I can't beat that answer.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the general question, too, is around, there's a lot of anxiety around protection for the artists, for, you know, the creative work that we as readers we don't even know until, you know, there's some snippet of, hey, this is actually AI, and suddenly, you know, it gets pulled. So I don't know that we know that answer, or that we could come up with that answer of how we protect ourselves, other than Dolen, who was like, let's not use it. Which feels, yeah.
I don't know if not using it will protect you.
I know, and I know that, you know, we've heard of some of the sort of very public allegations of AI, even beyond this recent author, but the former president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, they ran her work through that machine. And it was a very, to me, unfair attack on her scholarship, because so much of what we're doing is interconnected. I mean, we can't help but be influenced by the things that we read. And so I agree with you. Like, I fear someone that is, you know, my work that I know I didn't use, but I fear someone putting it through a machine and then making an allegation like that. It's just, it's unfair. And the technology for the detection also is not there yet.
They ran Mary Shelley's work through the system, and they're just like, she fake. I'm like, no, no, you know? And so, like, I think we should also be a little, like, techno-pessimist, for these systems, until we feel that we either believe that the system knows and can really detect humanity, or that it's a machine. Like, which one is which? It's a machine when it's doing other things, but it's a perfect human detector when it's finding someone out in a lie. And I think we have to decide whether that is, they've run Jane Austen through that thing, and they were just like, she uses too many M dashes. They really said she used excessive M dashes, Jane Austen. So, like, all I'm saying is, like, a position of skepticism toward our machine overlords, you know?
Thank you so much.
Okay, next, and then you're next.
Thank you all so much for being here. I attended Nikki's workshop at Cleveland Library. It was wonderful. Thank you so much. My question is, you're such great writers. Were you readers as young children and young women?
I mean, I was a voracious reader. I grew up isolated, kind of the only person of color in the whole area in Ohio where I grew up in a refugee family, so all I had were books. I read endlessly.
Me too. And I came from a family of non-readers, so it was difficult for me to even get books. And every book I got my hands on, I read.
My auntie and grandmother used to have books stacked up to their wall. I used to think it was like wainscoting, you know what I mean? Of these little Harlequin trade romances. And I was so young, and I used to run into those books and flip right to the middle, you know? If you knew what the middle was, then you knew she'd have no business reading that, okay? But I read anything I could put my hands on, so much so that I was reading my aunt's books, and she took me to the Houston Public Library, and she says, I'm gonna teach you I'm gonna date myself here, how to use the Dewey Decimal System so you can find your own books. And I was off to the races. I was reading Stephen King, 800-page Stephen King novels, right? At a very young age. I would not give those books to my child, right? But everything that I could touch, I read. The back of cereal boxes, you know? Like studied them like novels all the time, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Sabrina, and I look forward to reading all of your books. They sound fabulous. My question is about the marketing. I understand that you worked in the marketing and it was boring to you. Marketing is my background. As part of the marketing packages for you with the publisher, do you all do ebooks? Do you all do audiobooks? And if you do audiobooks, how do you work with the actors, or do you have any say in who acts on your audiobooks?
Yeah, my book has an ebook version, an audiobook version, and my publisher sent over 3 different actresses auditioning. And we made sure that the test included a passage where you needed to read Vietnamese. And so I tried to choose based on the acting ability, the emotion, and also the authenticity of the accent. But there are a lot of different accents, and so I had a review that said, the audiobook narrator didn't pronounce anything correctly. It's just a different dialect.
Honestly, it was the same. They sent over these auditions for certain types of characters, and sometimes you just have to fall in love with the. It's never the voice in your head, you know, but you end up having to fall in love with that. And as far as the marketing packages, they give you a piece of paper saying, you know, this is gonna blow away every marketing package that's ever been done. But ultimately, you end up, unless you make some amazing TikTok, just somewhere in the middle of people knowing your work and not knowing it, you know?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that, actually, other than to say, you know, there's a lot of talk online about who gets marketing and their publishers and who doesn't, and I try not to worry about that too much. I just try to write the best possible book I can, because the best marketing is word of mouth. If you have a marketing background, you know that. And if you write a book that, I'm not saying there aren't a lot of really, really excellent books that fall through the cracks, but I am saying that it all starts with the product. You know, because you can get $1 million, I mean, I've known people that get big 7-figure advances, but the book, and had all the marketing in the world, and the book never caught on. But I'm always like, if I ever get Oprah, y'all, I'm gonna be ready, you know? I'm gonna have a good book, because I am not gonna throw away that opportunity.
I want to add that I totally vouch for the audiobooks too. I did immerse, I know this is going to sound wild, but my brain just needs sometimes to do immersive reading. So have the book in front of you and listen to the audiobook. so good. And
People are doing that.
and that, yes, and it really helps focus from the clouds of everything.
Now, do you
going
listen
on.
to your audiobook at 1.0 or 1.5?
That depends. That depends. If I'm walking, then it's 2. Yeah, is that too much? Is that too much? Okay. Well, let's pretend I didn't answer. I see we have another question over there.
Hi, I'm Julie, and I've been lucky enough to be a student of Dolen's. My question is, obviously, you guys write an incredible first draft, and then you go back and you edit, and you go back and edit again, presumably. How do you decide when you're done, or how do you decide when you're ready for someone else to take a look at it?
Let me just put a point of correction. I write a terrible first draft, okay? just so you know. And it never feels done to me. It's like this sense of when I have only small things to quibble with, but there's always a quibble. But like if suddenly this whole section doesn't make sense versus like why is he saying that one thing in this section, I know to kind of leave it alone. There is an art in knowing when to leave the work alone and when it's ready for other people. When I decide when it's ready for other people, when I'm in my hubris of like that second draft, when you think it's perfect, you know what I mean? You're familiar with the second draft, and it really fools you, and you're like, this is the best piece of American literature that I've ever produced. And then you give it to someone, and they're like, nothing in this makes sense. And so you have to go back and reconcile what was going on in your head with how that book is perceived. But I do not recommend doing that too early, because the introduction of another eye, of another perception, can change the story that you kind of fundamentally wanted to tell to yourself first. But yeah, I do it in that hubris moment of like, is this the next Oprah's book club?
I agree, though. I don't show my work to anyone too early. I didn't tell my husband that I was writing a book. He didn't know I was writing a book. I think I might have even sent it to agents before he even knew, and he didn't read a draft until it was like I had gotten an editor, I think. And then he was great. He gave great notes at that time, but I don't like anyone to see it too early. I don't even like to talk about what I'm writing next.
Yeah, me either. And I do feel like at some point I'm sick of it. Like I do get to that point where I need some space from it. And sometimes that space is actually permanent space. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm done. But it's hard to know sometimes whether it's like I just need a break or it's done. But I will start to feel sick of my manuscript because I've gone over it so many times, But that doesn't mean it's done. It just means I'm sick of it, for the moment.
Well, this has been such a lovely time. I am so sad and that it has to end, and I'm so happy we got to do this. I have one final question. What was your favorite part of this DC Reads experience?
Definitely my museum trip with I had a great group. They were such great sports. We were on our feet for over 2 hours, and I know by the end we were all looking for a bench to sit on. So I love that part.
I will also say the workshop. If anyone was there with in that workshop with me, we ended up doing a live retelling of Goldilocks and the Three Bears with a woman with gold locks who stumbled into a party house, who was having the munchies and needed to determine what food was going to be the best for her. We did it live with the principles that we just learned about retelling. It was very fun.
For me, it's definitely meeting the people from the book clubs and the librarians who read my book who otherwise wouldn't have seen my book necessarily. The Beltway Book Club, there are a lot of just book clubs in the area that ended up finding my book through DC Reads. And I even had friends sending me social media posts. They're like, the DC Public Library has your book on their post. Yeah, and I was like, yeah, it's exciting.
So I just want to end there and say thank you to DC Public Library, to Penn Faulkner, for another wonderful year of DC Reads. We cannot wait for next year. And thank you to you all for coming. Thank you to the authors. They will be signing outside, so catch us outside. Thank you.